Look at this piston. Same engine family, same mileage as the one sitting next to it on the bench. One is whole, crown intact, ring lands square, the machined edges still catching the shop light. The other has a fist-sized chunk missing from the ringland. The aluminum looks like it was bitten off by something hungry, and there's a black scorch radiating outward like a burn scar. Both came out of small displacement turbocharged direct injection engines. Both ran on oil the owner trusted. Only one of them survived a phenomenon the industry quietly calls LSPI, low-speed pre-ignition. And what your manufacturer's technical service bulletins reveal about it should change the way you treat your turbo this week. For years, the established wisdom in mainstream automotive media has been pretty simple. Small turbo engines, they said, were the future. Downsized displacement, direct injection, a snail bolted to the exhaust, and suddenly a 1.5-liter four-cylinder is making the power of an old 2.5. Fuel economy goes up on the sticker. Emissions numbers look great on the certification test. And the talking heads kept repeating the same line. Drive these engines normally, change the oil on schedule, and you'll be fine. Manufacturers echoed it. Dealer service writers echoed it. Forum moderators echoed it. The idea took hold that if you weren't tracking your car or towing a boat with it, the engine didn't care what you did. That was the establishment view. Drive it like any other car. Use any oil that meets the viscosity grade on the cap. Don't overthink it. The trouble is, that view was built before the industry fully understood what was happening inside these combustion chambers at low RPM under heavy throttle. It was built before teardowns started landing on warranty desks with shattered pistons that no detonation map could explain. It was built, frankly, before the oil itself had to be reformulated to stop the damage. And the gap between the comfortable narrative and the laboratory reality is exactly where this story lives. To understand why this matters, you have to know who's been studying it. The work on LSPI didn't come from YouTube mechanics or forum threads. It came from the additive chemistry side of the industry. Companies like Afton Chemical, Lubrizol, Infineum, and Oronite, which formulate the additive packages that finished oil blenders mix into base stocks. These are the labs that supply the detergents, dispersants, anti-wear molecules, and friction modifiers that make a modern engine oil do its job. Around the middle of the last decade, their researchers started publishing technical papers, peer-reviewed, presented at SAE conferences, documenting a repeatable failure mode in turbocharged gasoline direct injection engines. The papers weren't sensational. They were dry, full of test cell graphs and combustion pressure traces. But the findings forced the American Petroleum Institute and ILSACs, the body that sets oil performance categories for North American light-duty vehicles, to draft an entirely new specification. That spec became API-SP and ILSAC GF6A, and one of its headline requirements, written into the test protocol, was LSPI resistance. Industry data shows the previous category, SN, had no such requirement. Let that sink in for a second. The oil that was on the shelf for years before 2020 was never tested for the specific failure mode killing these engines. So what is LSPI? Mechanically, pre-ignition. Think of it like trying to fire a cannon while someone's already lighting a match inside the barrel. In a healthy engine, the spark plug fires at a precisely calculated moment near the top of the compression stroke. The flame front spreads outward in a controlled wave, and the expanding gas pushes the piston down with the rod and crank, converting that pressure into rotation. Timing is everything. The engine's computer is choreographing thousands of these events a minute. Now imagine the fuel-air mixture lights itself before the spark plug gets its turn. The combustion event begins while the piston is still rising. Pressure builds against a piston that hasn't reached top dead center yet. The flame front and the rising piston collide. Peak cylinder pressures that should top out around 90 to 100 bar in normal operation have been measured in LSPI events at over 200 bar, sometimes higher. That's the deeper knock of LSPI, distinct from the sharp metallic crack of conventional detonation. It's a heavier, more violent sound, and it doesn't take many cycles to ruin metal. But here's where it gets interesting. Conventional pre-ignition has known triggers: overheated spark plugs, glowing carbon deposits, lean mixtures, excessive boost. Engineers have understood those for nearly a century. LSPI is different because it happens at low RPM under high load in engines that are tuned correctly with proper plugs on pump gas and with no obvious deposit issue. That's why it confused so many people for so long. The driver is doing nothing wrong by traditional standards. They're not racing, they're not lugging on purpose. They might just be merging onto a highway, accelerating up a hill, or pulling away from a stoplight in a tall gear because the transmission upshifted early to save fuel. The mechanism the research labs converged on involves oil, specifically the interaction between the oil film on the cylinder wall and the fuel spray from a direct injector. In a port-injected engine, fuel mixes with air in the intake manifold and enters the cylinder pre-vaporized. In a direct injection engine, fuel is sprayed straight into the chamber at extremely high pressure, often 200 bar or more, and that spray can impinge on the cylinder walls and the piston crown. When it does, it can pick up tiny droplets of oil that have crept past the rings or splashed from below. Those oil fuel droplets get carried into the combustion chamber suspended in the charge. Under the heat and pressure of compression, they can auto-ignite well before the spark plug fires. One stray droplet, one uncommanded combustion event. And the chain reaction begins. Picture it like this. You're standing in a dark room holding a lit match, and the room is full of a fine mist of gasoline. You're waiting for someone to give you the signal to drop the match. But before that signal comes, a single floating ember from somewhere across the room lights the mist on its own. The whole room flashes. That's LSPI on a cylinder scale. The flame propagation isn't controlled. The pressure spike isn't where the engineers designed for it. And the piston, the rings, the rod, the wrist pin, every component in the load path has to absorb a hammer blow it was never engineered for. The damage signatures are consistent across teardowns. Shattered ring lands, the lip of metal between the top and second ring grooves on the piston, are the most common. The top ring land is thin by design, sometimes just 3 or 4 millimeters of aluminum, and when peak pressure doubles in a single cycle, that land can fracture. Once a piece breaks off, you can smell it before you see it. The burnt oil tang from a scored ring land cooking against a hot cylinder wall, mixed with the sweetness of partially combusted fuel blowing past compromised seals. Then there's the bright scrape of fresh metal on the cylinder bore, where the broken piece has dragged. Bent connecting rods show up too, not bowed dramatically, but ever so slightly out of straight, enough that a precision check on a granite plate reveals the truth, and in the most violent cases, the piston crown itself fractures. The cratered top of a destroyed piston, with the wrist pin boss still attached to a piece of skirt, and the rest scattered through the sump, is the kind of image that ends up in a TSB photograph. Wait until you see what the rod looked like in one published case study. A 1.4-liter turbocharged direct injection 4-cylinder, around 40,000 miles on the odometer. No abuse history, no tune, factory plugs. The rod had a visible kink between the small end and the beam. The piston had a hole through it the size of a dime. The owner had been driving up a long grade in 5th gear at about 1,800 RPM, with the throttle pressed firmly down. By the time the engine started making noise, the damage was already done. The technician's report listed LSPI as the probable cause, and the manufacturer's TSB on that engine family acknowledged the failure mode and recommended a software update to alter shift logic, plus an oil specification change. Pay attention to that number, 1,800 at RPM, because the heart of this problem is the operating zone. LSPI is overwhelmingly a low RPM, high load phenomenon. Above roughly 2,500 RPM, the residence time of any rogue droplet in the chamber drops, the turbulence intensity rises, and the conditions that allow auto-ignition simply don't have time to develop. Below that, especially with the throttle wide open in a high gear, the cylinder pressure climbs slowly, the temperature climbs slowly, and a stray oil fuel droplet has plenty of time to find its ignition point before the spark plug intervenes. Modern transmissions, programmed to upshift aggressively for fuel economy, drop the engine into exactly this dangerous zone hundreds of times a day for normal drivers. This part will make you change how you drive on Monday. If you're in a 1.0 or 1.5 EcoBoost, a 1.5 or 2.0 turbo from GM, a 1.6 turbo from Hyundai or Kia, or any of the new generation of small displacement turbo direct injection engines from European brands, and you find yourself with the tachometer below 2,000 and the throttle more than halfway down. That's the zone. The fix isn't to drive slowly. The fix is to either ease off the throttle or downshift. Use the paddle shifters. Drop into sport mode if your transmission has it. Tap the shifter into manual. Whatever it takes to get the engine speed up before you ask it for full torque. Industry data shows that simply staying above 2,500 RPM under heavy load dramatically reduces the probability of an LSPI event. The mechanism gets starved of the conditions it needs. Now, the most common pushback you'll hear is the myth that you don't have to think about any of this if you just drive normally. The idea goes like this. Manufacturers wouldn't sell millions of these engines if they were truly fragile. Modern oils are engineered for these conditions. The ECU manages combustion. Stop being paranoid. And honestly, on paper, that argument has some weight. The vast majority of these engines do go their warranty period without a catastrophic failure. Most drivers never know LSPI exists. The probability per cylinder cycle is genuinely low. But here's the contradiction. Low probability per cycle is not the same as low probability per lifetime. A typical engine fires its cylinders something like 1 billion times before it hits 100,000 miles. Even if the LSPI probability per cycle is 1 in 100 million, you do not want to play those odds with a rod that wasn't designed to take a 200 bar hammer hit. And the same TSBs that quietly suggest you drive normally also, in the same breath, specify that you must use oil meeting the latest API and ILSAC categories, and they note revised shift schedules, and some of them recommend against extended low RPM lugging in language that's politely buried in the fine print. The industry knows, the drivers mostly don't. And that's not even the worst part. Some of the older oils still on shelves today, bottles printed with prior API categories, generic store brands, bulk drums at quick lube shops that haven't been rotated, were formulated before LSPI testing was even part of the certification protocol. They might pour the same, they might look the same, they might cost less. But research indicates that certain additive chemistries common in pre-SP oils can actually promote LSPI events rather than suppress them. The specific culprit identified by Afton, Lubrizol, and others was the calcium content in the detergent package. Calcium-based detergents, calcium sulfonates and calcium phenates, are excellent at neutralizing acids and keeping deposits down. They've been a workhorse of engine oil chemistry for decades, but laboratory testing showed that under the specific thermal and pressure conditions of a small turbo DI engine running at low speed and high load, calcium-rich oil films were more prone to producing the auto-igniting droplets that trigger LSPI. Magnesium-based detergents, by contrast, did not show the same effect, and in some test cells, actually suppressed pre-ignition events. The new API SP and ILSAC GF6A specifications, in effect, capped it or rebalanced the calcium and magnesium ratios in the detergent system to reduce LSPI tendency. That's a chemistry change, written into the standard. Most people don't know this, but the base oil matters too. Group 3 base oils, highly refined mineral oils, sometimes marketed as synthetic in North America. Combined with carefully selected, additive packages are at the core of most modern SP-rated oils. Group IV PAO and Group V ester base oils show up in higher-end formulations. The interaction between base oil volatility, additive solubility, and the deposit-forming tendency on piston crowns and ringlands is the kind of thing that takes a fleet of test engines and years of dynamometer hours to characterize. None of that work was done for the SN spec on small turbo DI engines because those engines didn't exist in volume yet. When you put a pre-SP oil into a 2024 model year turbo direct injection engine, you're running fuel made for one era through hardware made for another, and the hardware doesn't get to vote. So here's the resolution. If you drive a small displacement turbocharged direct injection engine, and that includes the Ford EcoBoost 1.0 and 1.5, the GM 1.5T and 2.0T families, the Hyundai Kia 1.6 turbo, and a long list of others, then the oil decision is not optional. The bottle must show API SP, and ideally ILSAC GF6A as well, in the donut symbol on the back label. If you see only SN, SM, or anything older, put the bottle back. If you take your car to a quick lube and they top up from an unmarked bulk drum, ask to see the API rating on the source container. Evidence suggests that the oil specification is the single largest variable a driver can control to reduce LSPI risk. If your owner's manual specifies a particular viscosity, and many, of these engines call for 0W20 or 5W30, then stay in grade. Don't run a heavier oil because you read on a forum that thicker is better. The viscosity was chosen to match the bearing clearances, the oil pump capacity, and the timing chain tensioner pressures. A thicker oil can starve the turbo bearing and the variable valve timing solenoids of flow on cold starts. Stay in spec. If you find yourself routinely at low RPM with the throttle deep, climbing hills in high gear, towing a small trailer, merging up a long on-ramp, then take manual control of the transmission for that moment. Drop a gear, get the engine speed up. The fuel economy penalty of an extra 1,000 RPM for 10 seconds is negligible. The cost of a fragmented piston is an engine. This week, when you drive, just notice where the tachometer sits when you press the throttle. Build the awareness. Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. If your manufacturer has issued a TSB on your engine family related to combustion knock, oil specification, or shift programming, then check whether the recommended software updates have been applied to your vehicle. The dealer can pull this from the VIN. Some of these updates change shift logic to prevent the transmission from settling into the LSPI zone under heavy throttle. Others adjust ignition timing maps. They're free if you're under warranty, and often modestly priced if you're not. And if you've already heard a heavier than normal knock from your engine under acceleration, in a tall gear, not the sharp ping of detonation, but a deeper, more violent thump, then take it seriously. Stop accelerating that way. Get the oil sampled, get the engine inspected. A bore scope down the spark plug holes can reveal a cratered piston crown without tearing the engine down. Early detection is the difference between a top-end inspection and a long block replacement. Seriously? Check what oil is going in your turbo at the next change. Look at the back of the bottle. Find the API donut. Confirm it says SP. If it doesn't, that's a problem you can fix this weekend for the price of a few quarts. If you know someone running a 1.5T or 2.0T direct inject engine on whatever's on sale at the warehouse club, send them this video. They probably don't know any of what you just heard, and the cost of telling them is nothing compared to what it'll cost them later. Subscribe so you don't miss the follow-up, because the next video walks through the specific TSBs by manufacturer and model year, including the ones the dealer won't bring up unless you ask by number. Drive smart, watch your torque underload, and protect the engine you've already paid for. Subscribe.